welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And today we have with us a really special guest who's actually going to be joining us here at the Center for Healing Neurology for both video and in-person consultations. His name is Jeff Granville, and he is the father of 8 children. You heard me right, that's 8. He also has 6 grandchildren and has spent most of his adult life on the personal quest and self-study to explore where science, biology, and spirituality merge. Jeff has been immersed in the pediatric medical environment over the past 5.5 years in the care of his young son, McCoy, and this is a story that we're going to hear about today, his son who had cancer. He serves as a family advisor and a 4th-year member of the Family Advisor Council at Seattle Children's Hospital. He also serves on nurse orientation and anesthesiologist training panels, as well as root cause analysis and hospital-acquired condition safety panels. He is trained and certified as a first responder in the Parent Support Group. In his work with pediatric patients, families, and care providers, as well as adult patients, Jeff has developed a unique approach that unites the body, mind, and spirit trinity to enhance receivership of treatment, procedures, and surgeries. And this is not an exaggeration. You'll hear about this in a second. Through his nonprofit Mindful Presence, presence as spelled as in gift, Jeff brings the gift of mindfulness, coherence, and controlled breathing to reset and entrain the autonomic nervous system and reduce stress and anxiety. So if you have experienced any stress out there, then Jeff may be the guy for you. So Jeff, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, thank you, Jillian. I really appreciate that. That's very flattering. I'm honored and really sinks in, when you hear that about the distance we've come. So thank you very much.
You have an incredible story. So let's start out just by hearing your story. What happened?
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm the father of 8 children, and not all by my high school sweetheart. I had 6 older kids and was a single parent for 15 years and met another lady in my life and had 2 more kids. And we were living in Anacortes, Washington, and I was in the boat building and repair industry. And after the stock market crash in 2008, the housing market crash, I lost my boatyard and we decided to move on to a sailboat. And we had 7 kids at the time. I had 7, and my wife and I had 1 in our new little pod. And we were going to cruise on this sailboat. We were all set to go cruising, and we found out we were expecting what turned out to be my 8th child, 3rd son, McCoy. And we decided to sell the sailboat and move on to a farm in eastern Washington. It is still there, 34 acres on the Kettle River, self-sustaining, multi-generational family farm, artesian well. 2 years into it, we're eating everything on our plate is from our own garden and our own harvest. So we were in a really good place. And then, as life has it, my wife at the time decided that wasn't the lifestyle for her anymore, and she wanted something different and left the farm. And the kids and I were there with the rest of my family. And it just turned out that 3 months after that was announced, McCoy got really sick, and we were in eastern Washington, and we were no longer together as a family. But when McCoy's mom had him, she took him into the emergency room in Colville. And they said, it looks like he's got a local virus. His face was really swollen up and he was uncomfortable. And so they prescribed him some Benadryl for the swelling and said, just, report back. So when he came to visit me, it was just after Christmas in 2014. And I ended up getting laid off of my job, and I had extra time. So we decided to go to Anacortes to visit my mom and spend 10 days in Anacortes. So we packed up a bag to last 10 days, and I still haven't gone back. So plans do change. So we were in a tough spot, a new place as a family, and exploring how that was going to be for us. And then McCoy's very, very sick. So when we were in Anacortes, we had driven through the night and got there about 1 a.m, and McCoy had slept fine in his car seat. And when I took him in and laid him down, he was really struggling to breathe. If he laid on his back, he couldn't breathe. He couldn't sleep. And so I kind of bed shared with him and rolled him onto me a little bit on his side, and it seemed to help a little bit. And we made it till early morning, like 5 or 6 o'clock. And I had noticed that he was really shallow breathing, like a child with a fever, but he didn't have a temperature at all. And so I called my doctor, and the one day that he was going to be there between Christmas and New Year's break was that very day that I called in, and he was able to see him, or otherwise we're going to go to a free clinic or something and walk in. But he looked at McCoy and agreed that it seemed like a local virus or something, and let it take its course. But I explained to him that, he had labored to breathe and was really breathing shallow, but didn't have a temperature. And that morning when I took his pajamas off to dress him to go to the doctor, he had what looked like varicose veins all across his chest. It was really disturbing. I'd never seen any of that. And with 7 kids older than him, I'd seen quite a bit. So he said, well, let's order an x-ray. If the insurance company pays for it, then that's great. And we waited, and they wouldn't pay for it. So I'm like, well, how much is it? So he told me, and I said, well, let's just do it. So we got the x-ray, and they thought it was double pneumonia. And he gave us a prescription, and we went and got it filled, and he said to take some after dinner. Well, right after dinner, we got a phone call from him saying that the radiologist had routinely examined all the films from the day and said, that's not double pneumonia. McCoy has a chest mass, and he needed a CT. And if they couldn't get it approved, I was to drive in the morning to Seattle Children's Hospital, which is exactly what I did. And I arrived at about noon on December 30th, 2014. And within an hour of being there, they had taken blood work and found that his white blood cells were over 400,000, and he had leukemia or lymphoma. And that was earth-shattering. As I can tell you more later, that it just really rocked my foundation. Like, why, God? Why would you do this to this innocent little boy? How could this happen? And then I was really reflecting on, I'd grown up, I was big and strong, played sports, work in a boatyard. I could really fix anything, so to speak. And I was not in my element. I don't know the language. I don't like being around doctors. I don't like hospitals. I have nothing to offer. I've really felt at a loss because it was just me and him and the entire medical establishment around us. And he gasped for a breath. I fell to my knee. And in that moment, I realized that I was given everything I needed to help him the most. And that was just to be with him in the moment and make him feel not alone, let him know I would always be there. And that, in fact, turned out to be the saving grace of the entire thing, because when something like that hits you, your onion is peeled like that. The facade we have of who we are, of, I'm a boatyard manager, I coach their sports, I do this or do that. That's your identity. Well, that's gone. That's stripped from you. And all you have is that moment. That was a very powerful moment and a very powerful lesson. And it really played out to be the deciding factor. And learning what I've learned and getting to the point we have. One of the things they needed to do is draw spinal fluid. And they first had to install a PICC line, peripheral catheter, so they can give medicine and draw blood. But they weren't able to sedate him. And we had to find a way to get through the moment. And we actually had a care meeting 24 hours later. We had a care meeting because oncology couldn't give chemotherapy until they drew spinal fluid, and surgery couldn't draw spinal fluid until they're able to sedate him. If they sedated him, he'd lose his cardiorespiratory tone and crash. So one of the nurses, as a matter of fact, very observant nurse, had noticed how I was with him. And when he needed some oxygen, or he needed his IV placed or his lab draw, how I was able to talk him through it. And they went to the chief surgeon at the time, and we had a discussion, and they got a care meeting called with, 40 professionals in the room and 2 60-inch flat screens. And one had the MRI of his airway that was being constricted by tumors, and one was of his superior artery, which was being blocked. He was able to send blood to his head, but not return to his heart. That's why he was swollen. So by that second day, his eyes were completely swollen shut. He was inside the darkness of his own imagination, and it was a very scary place for a 4-year-old. So I would describe things to him and what was going to happen and things like that, so there wouldn't be a surprise. And nobody likes surprises in a medical environment. It's not, It's like alien autopsy to a little kid, So they had care conference. They like I said, the two screens and saying that, this is what we think. We don't have the tools to help him. There's nothing we have available to us to help your son. The only thing we think will work is to get special permission to get you in there into the surgery room and talk him through it. And I really had no idea what that was. I had heard about creative visualization. I had read Shakti Gawain's book and, had done some controlled breathing and, pursued, my quest for, like I said, the balance or the meeting point, the merging point of science, biology, and spirituality. So I knew what being in the moment meant in meditation, prayer, but I had no idea what the true power of it really was. And the next 5 years was the lesson in that. And so what happened is he was receiving the PICC line installed first, and I was right down in his ear describing everything that happened. And I had 5 surgeons around me and the crash team. And, there's Dr. Steve Standage was the head of surgery and emergency. And he was right here next to me as I talked him through it. And they were able to install the PICC line, and McCoy didn't bat an eye. He just breathed this rhythm. He had a rhythm where he would breathe in really slowly. And then every 4th or 5th breath, he would kind of give a little snort, like a little snore. And I didn't realize what that was at the time, but he was bouncing in and out of theta. He was trying to go to sleep, but my voice wouldn't allow him. His connection with my voice would keep him in that theta state. So he was literally having a mind out of body state where whatever they did to his body didn't affect him. And it was a miracle. And we got the PICC line installed, and then the surgeon says, okay, now for the tough one, we need to do a lumbar puncture without station. And he's in a very fragile state. And it's not that they've never done them without anesthesia before, but in such a fragile state where anything could shock him and his eyes are closed. He can't, it's not an ideal environment to do a lumbar puncture. And the same scenario played out in that. We got him in a fetal position and the doctors were going to hold him down. And I said, no, you can lay hands on him, but don't restrict him. The surest way to start a fight is to try to hold somebody down. It's very triggering. If you've ever had somebody try to restrain you, especially when something's going to happen to you, that's a very frightening place to be, and which is the basis of everything we do now. So I was able to talk him through it. He didn't have to be restrained. He didn't bat an eye, and they got 3 beautiful vials of spinal fluid that tested negative for new leukemic blasts. So they were able to administer chemotherapy, and his swelling started to go down, and it was just miraculous. The chief surgeon, Steve Standage, who happened to be a bishop at the Mormon church, said that was the closest thing to walking with God he'd ever seen, because life will test us. Life tests everybody. Nobody's void of tests, no matter what it seems like from the outside, right?
Part of what made us here at Center for Healing Neurology aware of you and this story was that experience. So Dr. Eileen Ruhoy, our neurologist here, our medical director, had heard about that experience from some of the folks who were in the room. And it was well known that what happened in that room was unexpected and nearly unbelievable. Like, it was talked about, like, if you weren't there, you would have a hard time understanding that the power of mindfulness, that your ability to bring McCoy into a state that allowed for no anesthesia and no restraints during a lumbar puncture, and as you said accurately, a very fragile and vulnerable 4-year-old, that is not generally how we practice medicine. I think that came to our awareness through the medical community. So not only was, the physician that you spoke with kind of amazed and brought it home to his own family, but you did begin to make a name for yourself in the medical community as somebody who had insight about the power of mindfulness to change how we sedate, assess, test, and treat children. People who had decades of experience were, in medicine, that their minds were shifted by witnessing that experience and by witnessing your work with McCoy. So let's go on and keep hearing the story, but I just wanted to mention that piece of it.
Wow, Jillian, I so appreciate that. I had never heard that before.
Yeah.
I did not know that Eileen had heard about that. Thank you.
At one point, Dr. Ruhoy had turned to me as we were discussing you, and she said, oh, yeah, it's amazing what he's done, and medical doctors recognize it.
Yeah, I've had throughout this experience, McCoy has been through several experiences where mindfulness and his ability to get to a 0 point is the deciding factor. I mean, there's been a couple medical procedures, like they had to drain fluid from his pericardial sac twice. And if you have, I have a teaspoon to a tablespoon of fluid that lubricates the heart inside the pericardial sac. And because he had so many tumors restricting his heart, he started developing fluid and pressure on his heart. And they did an ultrasound and thought, well, he might have 80 milliliters. And that becomes emergent. And it can cause a medical condition called tamponade, where it puts hydraulic pressure onto the heart and can collapse the heart and go to cardiac arrest. And it's really scary for parents because they make you sign the papers of acknowledgement and approval for them to defib him back to life. Because when they sedate a child to remove 80 milliliters, it relaxes the cardiorespiratory tone so much, the heart stops and they die, and they have to drain the fluid quickly and bring them back to life with defib. You have to sign for that. And McCoy was able to go into his zone, into the vacuum, as we describe it, because we talked about the center of an atom as the where the vacuum holds the protons together, right? So he knew all about that at 4 years old, 5 years old. That's the space we go to when we fall back into our zone. So he was in such a relaxed state, and they were able to give him so little anesthesia to reach the cardiorespiratory tone they wanted and to show that he was under. They were just amazed he was already under. He just had a little whiff, and he's out. Because, if you're at Wart 9, it takes you this much medicine to get you down to 0 just so you can be put under. So if you can find a way to get to 0, then it takes less anesthesia to get you under. And that's a really good metaphor for life, and that being able to find 0 and be at that place so you don't respond poorly or build stress is key. And we can go more into that. But so in this procedure, they got him under, and they found that there was 250 milliliters in his pericardial sac.
And a teaspoon is 5 mils. A tablespoon is 15 mils, just for folks at home. Yeah.
So 250 milliliters. The fact, they were saying if he had 100 milliliters and they tried to put him under, he would go into cardiac arrest. So he was able, and they said, and I'm sure you will research it, that his cardiorespiratory tone as he went into anesthesia and went through the procedure didn't vary hardly any. It was just extremely stable, because they monitor that if they need to add more anesthesia or whatever. They try to find that sweet spot where they're not, putting the kid under too far and having bad side effects. And in this case, it would be life-threatening. So that was the first time. The second time they had to do it was a few weeks later, and the fluid built up again, and it was starting to affect his blood pressure. But he didn't show any signs of tamponade. And so they knew that they were going to have to do it again. And they got us prepared for it, and we got prepared for it ourselves. And the same scenario played out. He was at 0 when they started induction, and he got under very quick, very easily. And they were able to pull the fluid out without causing any distress to the body or going into cardiac arrest. And that second time they pulled out 450 milliliters.
Oh my God. Wow.
16 fluid ounces, nearly. So it's just unbelievable. This is, it's when you say it's unprecedented or unbelievable or never heard of, this is an extreme. And this is, just one set of situations out of a dozen where he participated in saving his own life. And us as a team, getting to that 0 point before he goes under is the key.
And how old is McCoy now?
He's 10.
And how is he doing now, just as a way to...
He's great. We started karate at the local dojo for physical therapy when he kind of surpassed his recovery therapy. And he's now a brown belt at 10 years old. And he's doing homeschool like everybody else, virtual classroom. He's in 5th grade, and he's just fantastic.
Okay, great. I just wanted to give people that spoiler alert.
Yeah, it's nice to throw that in there. I try to add that in my PowerPoint when we get through some of the photos of these procedures, because I took photos of these things all the way through.
Yeah.
And it's nice to throw in the well picture,
Yes.
that, I'm going to cut right to it. He's okay. Don't worry, because it's pretty engrossing.
So when you talk about doing mindfulness with him, tell us a little bit about what did you do? Like, is it what you said that's important? Is it how you said it? What made the magic happen?
Oh, that's a great question. I reflect back to being a dad with my other kids and, holding my kids. I had usually the privilege of bouncing them on a ball to get them to sleep and, as babies. And we all hum and we sing to our kids, and I have a deep resonant voice and a bit of power behind it. And with McCoy, with my other kids, I'd always, held them, with their head by my throat and hum. And I didn't know. I mean, that's just something you do, like in Lamaze, women breathe, and when you go through childbirth, you moan and make noise. And it turns out that stimulation of the vagal nerves from the vocal cords releases serotonin into the bloodstream and can ease pain. It actually squirts serotonin onto the heart through the vagal nerves and slows the heart rate and reduces blood pressure. So, the natural moaning process of dealing with pain is what triggers the body to relieve pain. Okay. So with McCoy, I had to be very close to him to speak low, and I had to describe things to him. Like when he went through the PICC line install and the unsedated lumbar puncture, I talked him down our river where we had floated the river for 2 summers, and down our ski slope where he had skied. He started skiing when he was 2. So both of those experiences are extremely exciting and fun, but they're also scary. So when he's sitting on my lap on the tube and when we're holding hands or holding him skiing, he has to trust me and listen to my voice. And so those 2 things that I picked were things that reminded him of a good time, and it was still scary, and he knew he could trust me. So I think what I said was important because I related to something in his memory that he could really visualize inside his swollen eyes. And it was something that he was excited and exhilarated and had grown confidence in from being scared to like achieving something. We gained confidence. So those 2 things were really important that I chose for the guided meditation. And then the sound of my voice and the vibration of my own vocal cords also vibrates his vagal nerves. So there was a physical auditory frequency and resonance that transmits from one person to another when you're in an intimate situation. And it can be either disturbing or soothing. And of course, this case, it was soothing. So that's really the key. And it was out of the need. Like, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And when you're in the moment with the need, that's where the download comes. That's where you get divine inspiration. When you can go to zero and just be there in the moment of the need, you will get the information you need. You will get the clarity and the inspiration to do the right thing.
And that's exactly where I am curious to ask the next question, which is that we talked in the beginning about how his diagnosis rocked your foundation, rocked your world. And so I think for many of us, we are so terrified. How do you get to the place of overwhelming terror to the place where you can perceive what needs to happen? How are you able to move your focus? Or is there anything that you did or can kind of share with us? I don't even know if that process is something that you would necessarily be conscious of, about kind of what needs to happen. So you could very well have been so anxious or so freaked out that you weren't able to be there for McCoy because you were so terrified yourself. What allowed you to be able to listen and to shift your focus?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's extremely important because we all have a pivot point where, the fight or flight mechanism is triggered and it's a call to action. The fight or flight mechanism is nature's way of giving us a unified call to action, as Candace Pert puts it in her book, Molecules of Emotion. And if you don't act on that, then it turns to chronic stress. So when you are in the moment and you listen to that and you act on that reaction, then you can act in a way that you have a possibility to help. But if you succumb to that, then you definitely won't contribute any help to the situation. Our situation was, an hour after we got to Seattle Children's and they took his blood work and his white blood cell count was 400,000. And they said he's got leukemia or lymphoma, but we don't know which. We have to do further testing before we can give him treatment. You go through that. Okay, I'll trade places right now. Take me. You're just bargaining for any type of hope. And, I was big and strong and able to fix things and athletic and ran a boatyard and hospital environment. No, I actually have a phobia of doctors and hospitals. And when I was sitting there, standing there saying, why? And I don't have the tools. I don't know the language. I don't like it. How am I going to help my son? And he gasped for a breath and I fell to my knees. And right in that moment, I knew that I was given everything I needed to help him the most. And that was just to be there in the moment with him, to make him feel like he would never be alone and be able to describe what was happening to him because his eyes were swollen. I had to be his eyes. He wanted to know what was going on. I mean, who wouldn't, right? So the fact that he couldn't see made me have to get up close to him and describe. And he had that connection of my voice. And that was a instantly soothing physiological response to have. And being there in the moment was the key. Yes.
I think that is the way that parenting, being a parent, is one of the ways that we are able to dispel and change our ego and our identity. Mm-hmm. We go into, I think most of us go into parenting thinking, this is who I am, this is how I'm treated in the world, and then, your infant throws poop on you. And that is inconsistent with your ego of how you're treated in the world. But here is this vulnerable being who needs you. It seems like that as a parent, your ego has to shift. You have to be able, we are acutely aware as animals on the planet that our young are vulnerable and our young need us. And there's ways that we have to put aside our perceptions and our assumptions, both of ourself and our role. And it sounds like that is what you had, that you went into this. And I just want to lay it out there because I think for parents out there who are struggling with something similar or who have struggled, and I think this is on all scales, like not all of us will have children who nearly die multiple times with cancer, but our children will fight at school, our children will cry, our children will get into accidents, our children will have head injuries, our children will lose at sports games, our children will do poorly in academics, our children will make lots of mistakes. And again, it is our job as parents to assess what our perception and our role and what we think we are there for. And it is our job to put that aside, to listen deeply for what their need is, and then respond to that need. And it sounds like that was the way through for you. And I bet that would be the way through for a lot of us, is to put aside our frustration, our fear, our anger, our rage, our panic, and to be able to listen deeply and come back to the reality of what is, which is that McCoy needed you, and he needed your voice. He needed your confidence in him. And that's what you were able to provide. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And like you say, it transfers from this situation to all of our life situations, because as we learn, our perception of reality is what creates our blood chemistry. And changing your perception changes everything. Mm-hmm. It opens up everything available to us through our spiritual life and our own physiology to change the dynamic of the moment. And for me, that moment where I fell to my knee, I was, you have this facade of ego of who you are, a boatyard manager, a parent, a coach, whatever, you have that identifies who you are. And for me, it was the sense of my onion being peeled, like that. Yeah. It was not a gradual thing. It was, I fell to my knee and I was nothing but his person at that. I was his dad and I was his caregiver, and that's all there is to it. And by dropping those layers, you change your perception. It's a whole different view from that 0 point than it is looking through your lenses of perception that we all hold in it's in our left brain, the chatter of who we are, what we're doing, how this new situation affected us in the past, relates to what happened in the past. It's just that constant, this new situation goes in this category compartment in our brain, and that's who we are. Well, when you're in the moment, that goes away. You're in right brain, and you're in that area of creation where, every poem has been written, every song that's been written, every math equation that's been discovered in nature, every invention, every download has happened when you're in the moment. Yeah. And that's where you speak without ego, you act without your facade. And it's when you're confronted with something in life, like something happening at school with your child, and you're kind of on the defensive. Well, I raised that kid and now he's acting out. So I'm kind of on trial here more than my kid, right? So you go in there with that preconceived human side of you. Well, last time I was at the principal, that didn't go very well. So here we go again. You're doing that, rocking back and forth. And it takes you out of the moment of what the need is. And the most important need at that moment is not how it affects your ego or what the principal's going to say, but it's the feelings inside your child. And the only way to get to that 0 point with your child is to set yourself aside. And that is absolutely critical, absolutely critical.
So after these experiences with McCoy, you did not stop. You became a family advisor. You started teaching nurses. You've started doing training. And so tell us a little bit about what that work is.
When I first went through the original procedures with McCoy, and there was such a supportive, encouraging medical staff saying that, whatever we saw, whatever that was, we need more of that here. I've had a number of doctors say that, I need to go home and work on my relationship with my kids. I need to, it wasn't in a shaming thing. It was just an inspiring thing to witness. And that it's, McCoy's an amazing kid, and I work hard and care deeply, but we're not unicorns. This is very coachable, very teachable, repeatable trainings that are part of automatic nervous system. And because they're automatic, they are biohackable. Biohacking is something that is within our reach and something that is extremely powerful. So my real desire was to fill that void, to bridge that gap. I mean, it's like you've got science and spirituality, and they've been polar enemies and pitted against each other for years, right? And then biology in the middle is, there would be no such thing as science or spirituality without biology. And they're perceived as polar opposites. It's again an example of the false illusion of duality. We're all one, but we appear to be, it's like my older daughter said, Dad, we're human beings. Sometimes we're more human and sometimes we're more being. And it's like it's an illusion of duality when really we're one with it. So there were things throughout our experience that we could have been very angry. We could have sought lawyers, and if anything happened, again, I drive to Seattle Children's, but no medical profession, no profession is perfect. There's many things that you can find anger with, especially when you're so scared, because that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that outlet. But the situation taught me is that it's better to be the low pressure system in the middle and draw things together, to be the biology in the middle that pulls science and spirituality together. I mean, if you call, Western medicine on one side of the medical industrial complex, as I say it, and then you've got woohoo on the other side. You've got ancient cultures and stories of healings and things that the Western medicine calls woohoo. I saw so much room for improvement in bringing the real science of these physiological modalities, these mindful modalities and controlled breathing. And I was encouraged by the staff. I mean, there isn't a doctor there that wouldn't love to have more ease and calm in the room. And the less anesthesia we give, the less side effects, the less fog. I mean, everybody's into it. Everybody gets it, but it's not something they school for. And when they see it happen, then they really want it drawn into that environment to improve it, because their calling is to help kids, and help people out. So they encouraged it and sent me a connection to the Family Advisor Council, which is a group of veteran parents that serve on committees to advise on how high the speed bump should be, or where the toilet should be situated, or what we think about, different things. And there's many family advisors. And then there's a council of 16 people that meet throughout the year once a month and guide how the Family Advisor Council can best serve. And we're invited to serve on many, many panels, like nurse orientation and anesthesia, and then hospital safety are my passions and where I've been mentored to fill, because that's where my message can be best heard and served. So that's what drew me into it, is wanting to find the middle and draw all sides together and not be part of an opposition, but be part of the tie that binds, the draw that brings everything together. Yeah.
And so you've been working with parents and families, and tell us what sessions look like.
Yeah, well, it's all over the scale. I mean, I learned in counseling in my own life that sometimes, I won't even say sometimes, for me, it's every time. The best sessions are the ones with no agenda, where you can just come in and be and let it flow. And that's that 0 point. If you come in with a list, I'm going to tackle all these problems today and my marriage is going to be perfect. That's not a reality. You have to come in with the open heart and open mind and be peeled, have your onion peeled, and be at that 0 point for any progress to happen. So I come into a session and I really want to find out what's on someone's mind. What is troubling them? What are we feeling anxious about? Why are we here? And go from there. And there's enough information and there's enough tools available and science available and anecdotal stories that play into that to go down the path with people. And the main focus is, whether you call it the seat of witness, like where you go when you pray or you meditate, you go inside yourself. It's called the seat of witness or the seat of consciousness, or Ho'oponopono calls it the 0 point. You're at zero. Japanese call it mushin, where you're of no mind. You have no human windings leading you one way or another. And from that 0 point, all your abilities are available. When you have no human windings, then you're open to everything, including that you don't yet know. So that is where I go when I receive somebody, and I want them to feel that for even a moment and be able to build on that, because any little bit of success can lead to resiliency. And my real guidance, my goal is that self-awareness allows self-regulation, and that leads to resiliency and success. It's a spiral towards success versus being held down at the hospital and spiraling towards a negative effect. Because one or the other is where you're going to go. And how you handle that in the moment is the important part. So just that understanding can be a breakthrough. I mean, most people think mindfulness is just a great idea and a good practice, and there's, some benefits. But it turns out one of the fathers that I got to know at the Ronald McDonald House, who actually lost his daughter to a brain tumor, I got to know the family very well. I was there for 3.5 years with my kids and met hundreds of families. And he actually is a triage counselor, and he treats counselors and psychologists and medical professionals, clinicians that are burnout, empathy fatigue. And actually clinicians are the highest rising category for suicide in America right now because of the stress in the system. So they all know it. But so being at the Ronald McDonald House for 3.5 years, I met this amazing family, and he was a triage counselor, and he treats people with clinicians and doctors and nurses with empathy fatigue and burnout. And he actually uses mindfulness as a triage for people who are done. Like the last effort of the medical psychological community is to send them to this guy. And it's just like in Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. He's 26, he's depressed, he's suicidal, he's just doesn't like his life, and he's sitting on a bench and his thoughts are going through his head. And he said, I can't stand the way I'm thinking. And he's like, if I can't stand the way I'm thinking, then who's listening? And he realized just an aha moment. And that led to, books that help millions of people and several Oprah shows. And, he's an amazing force in the world of mindfulness, but it can be a really paradigm shifting aha moment. When, like one of the things I do with kids, when I work with kids, is I talk about how we have a three-dimensional world. Every kid knows what 3D glasses are and 3D, it's a thing. Well, in our world, we have 3 dimensions where our height, our width, and our depth gives us volume. That's what makes us here in the material world. And your awareness of that is the fourth dimension. So it's a really important thing to teach pediatric patients who are having things done to their body and are facing things they should never have to face about what is their spirit and what is their energy and what's going to happen after they leave their body. Because there's, whether they are going to pass or they're thinking about it, that is a question. That's where we are shaken to our core with our stance with spirit. And that's the first thing we have to align. But what I do is I talk about our three dimensions and our awareness of it, and that we are the observer, that there's a place that you can go behind the physicality. You know, you close your eyes and have the world, the physical world, melt away. And then it's an infinite. You see infinity by closing your eyes, you know, and so there's a way to get there, and there's a lot of modalities. One of the strongest things we do is controlled breathing, because controlled breathing is the way that we biohack our system to go from fight or flight in the sympathetic into the rest and digest of the parasympathetic. And when we're being mindful and aware of our emotions and the feelings in our body, then we can catch that sooner and breathe through it. We have breathing techniques that breathe through that first emotion so that you face it and dissolve it instead of allowing it to flood and build. Because when you're not in the moment and distracted, you can wind on something and it can build to a flood before you're even aware that you're doing it. And then your blood chemistry is disrupted for 3 or 4 hours at the least. So the more mindful and centered you are, the more you notice that first hint of an emotion, a feeling in your body, and you can sense it and breathe it. And we have a reset breathing to breathe through that first sense of emotion. And then on the exhale, you go to zero, you breathe it back to zero. And then we also have a controlled breathing, which is, as you asked earlier, the exact practice that McCoy and I used was to breathe in through the nose for 5 seconds and breathe out through the mouth, saying ah, and the ah vibrates the vocal cords, vibrate the vagal nerves, and release serotonin. So you have a cleansing inhale and an activating exhale. So as you guys know, studying biofeedback, when we breathe in, our heart rate speeds up. And when we breathe out, our heart rate slows down. Because as we breathe in, we trigger the sympathetic and the heart starts to speed up. And as we exhale, we trigger the parasympathetic. And when we're feeling stuck, when you're feeling like this is all I can think about, this, whether it's the pandemic or the smoke or whatever's going on in your life, and that's the dominating thought process, which takes you out of spirit and puts you in the body. You know, it makes you a physical thing in a physical world, detached from your ability to get inspiration. So when we do the controlled breathing, it sets us up to do what I call coherence breathing, and where you feel your heart rate. And instead of counting seconds, you count heartbeats. So when you breathe in your nose, you count 5 heartbeats. And when you breathe out your mouth, you count 6 heartbeats. And you'll notice that they slow down. So that gives you a biophysical connection to your body that you're not generally aware of. And it takes the several $100 heart math equipment and other biofeedback equipment and gives you the power to touch your own, like I touch my own pulse in my hand, or you can feel it on your neck. And that gives you the biophysical connection to your heart, which the heart speaks to the body and brain in 5 different ways. And one of them's through the vagal nerve, and the other is the biophysical pulse that activates every cell in your body, and thyroid regulation. Everything is done by hydraulic pulse of the beating of the heart. And then there's 3 other ways we can go into later, but there's signals that your heart gives your body. And really, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to identify the thought process, the things you feel stuck on that are keeping you in that left brain activity, and give you reset skills to get into the moment, which puts you in right brain. And Dan Siegel in his book Mindsight calls it lateral integration. Okay, so you're integrating. When you're left brain dominant and worry, you're not spending time being creative and singing and dancing and coloring and painting and creating. Okay, and that's what we need in our life, is we need balance. Homeostasis is the tendency of the autonomic nervous system to find balance, and that's its job. That's what it does. So when we're constantly worried and we're in left brain, then we're instead of being integrated, we're disintegrated, we're torn apart. And there are activities and modalities to reintegrate both sides and find balance again. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we do. It's not like a specific path to follow for every person. It's not a cookie cutter. Everybody's different and thinks different and feels different and responds different. And I think the gift of really being at zero and being in the moment when I receive and listen, it then inspires me to pick a modality that I think might help and just go down that path together. And just like McCoy knows he's not alone, when you visit with me, you'll know you'll never be alone again.
And so you've been seeing patients and families in the past at the Ronald McDonald's House and through Children's, and then you'll be seeing folks here as well. So video and in person.
Yeah.
Share with us a little bit of what your larger mission is. If we put you in charge of the world, what would it look like?
Wow. Well, I would be busy with some really big topics before we got to do what we want to do. But yeah, if I could take my magic marker and make the scape that I wanted to see. As you know, Jillian, I have a vision to take over the Talaris Conference Center that's near the Seattle Children's Hospital. It's a absolutely perfect facility and the grounds, natural grounds for a wellness center. And it's something that Seattle should be extremely proud to have available now. And it's empty. It's owned by Bruce McCaw. It is in the permit process to be torn down and have 69 $2 million homes built in the Laurelhurst community, which they oppose adamantly. And they are absolutely in favor of a vision of a wellness center. And I know that there's some shared vision there that you can talk about if you want to, but I would like it to be world headquarters for mindful presence and bring the gifts of mindfulness, coherence, and controlled breathing to patients, families, and care providers at every children's hospital around the world. This isn't just for a select few. It doesn't cost any more money. It's a no harm offering. There is no downside. Just like saving the Talaris, there's no downside to it. It's actually a commonality for the greater good, is something we can do. It's a jewel that the Seattle community can still protect and save and turn into something paradigm shifting. And that's my goal. And we even have a product that we're bringing to market that can bring mindfulness and coherence to anybody without even realizing it's happening. So we'll talk about that more as we're allowed. But yeah, I've got a few ideas that I think will work. And one of the things I want to talk about and give credit to a physicist named Nassim Haramein, who is absolutely revolutionary in his thought and his papers. Without getting into quantum physics too deeply, he's really wrote some amazing papers lately. Nassim Haramein, who does lectures all over the world and workshop about quantum physics and the unified field theory. After that first day at the hospital with McCoy, when he had gotten through the PICC line install and the lumbar puncture without sedation, and he was given chemotherapy and settled and stable, and the whirlwind of doctors and nurses and the whole hospital environment that had been around us was diminished down to just the two of us. And something kept flashing in my consciousness about the eye of the storm and how we felt like we were the eye of the storm and there was chaos all around us, but we were this calm center of the eye of the storm. And everything seemed like it was happening in slow motion. There was a little bit of time warp thing going on. It was like we were more wave than particle. It was like, wow, this is really tingly, and there's a real sensation, a real thick sensation to that moment. And it was really in me. So I'm in the hospital bed with McCoy in one arm and my iPhone in the other, and I'm searching Eye of the Storm on YouTube and everything. I'm searching, and I find this Nassim Haramein, who I didn't remember that he was actually on the first Thrive movie, and I'd seen that, but I didn't make the connection. But here he is. He's on a stage in Barcelona, and he's given an 8-day conference, 12 hours a day, on unified field theory. And what does he say? He says, any meteorologist can tell you the velocity of the wind. I want to know the math of the eye. I want to know the math of singularity. What is it about that spot inside of chaos that is actually calm? Buckminster Fuller calls it the vector equilibrium. It's a dectaoctahedron with all points from the middle being exact. And there's a math equation for the eye of the storm. And that's the math equation of singularity. And when you're inside yourself at zero in the seat of witness, and you are in Mushin of no mind, you are a singularity and you're balanced. And everything, you become coherent in your brain-heart connection, and you can go from theta to gamma. And that's one of the things that Joe Dispenza documents neurologically in his workshops, is that when you reach gamma, there's a thing called tachypsychia, where time seems slow. And everybody remembers Michael Jordan and how he would get in a zone where he could not miss a shot. And he was famous for sitting in the locker room or outside the door before the game, going through visual moves that he was going to do during the game. And so he's practicing it in his mind over and over again. And he's in an extremely coherent position physiologically. And he would describe, as many people do, like, I just couldn't miss a shot. And I would go to pass the ball and it was like they were standing still and it went right through their legs. And, it's like there's a famous skydiver, they fly in these squirrel suits and they go down the hill and they go through targets with this squirrel suit and they're flying, and he had GoPro cameras on him, and he's he hit a marker. And he tumbled and fell and broke much of his body. And he was in the hospital describing it. And it was like this 20-minute dissertation of this happened here and this happened there. And, oh my gosh. And the GoPro video was like 2.1 seconds. But he had this 20-minute memory of what it was.
Yeah.
And what it is when the autonomic nervous system senses that you're in a near-death situation, it says, you know what? We need to record this in high def. And we need to be able to call on this to survive in the future. So what it does is it lays down more information per second of when the near-death experience is happening. And then when you recall it, it seems like it's much longer. And that's called tachypsychia. So when you get into a state of coherence by yourself or mutual or in a group, and you reach a point of gamma, then time kind of falls away. You have a different time clock in you than what's happening in reality. And you become more aware of your surroundings. You have more stimulus coming into you to record and experience, and it completely changes the outcome. So that's a very powerful innate skill that we have.
So that is a skill that we have as human beings that I think we don't often call on. In most of our daily lives, we're not asked to be part of that. And I think in this COVID pandemic, with our responsibilities spanning from sitting on the couch and just don't go outside or do anything to work your job from home while you're homeschooling your children, there is either a lot to do or nothing to do, but we're not out in the world the way we were. And from my understanding of your work, what encapsulates it is really these three processes of mindfulness being the first, coherence being the second, and controlled breathing being the third. That those are the realms that you continue to touch on and loop back through with the work you do with patients and clients, as well as the lectures that you're teaching through Center for Spiritual Living. And that what your hope is, your larger mission, is to really bring this to pediatric medical environments nationally and internationally, really, is what's needed. Did I miss anything?
No, I think it's great. And I'd like to respond to that, because during this time of COVID, I'm not allowed in the hospital, and only one parent is even allowed. So it's even more stressful. So that's why I'm expanding it to the offering of other people besides pediatric patients. Like, I do my workshops once a month with Center for Spiritual Living. I do it at no charge for the general public, because we're all experiencing this and we can all benefit from this. If it can work in a pediatric environment, it can work anywhere.
Yes.
Okay, so as you talked about the three pillars of mindfulness, coherence, and controlled breathing. Okay, so the controlled breathing is last, but when you practice controlled breathing and you're focusing on your breathing, you're automatically being mindful. That's like the description of mindfulness, is paying attention to your own sensations in your body. So through controlled breathing, you're being mindful and you achieve coherence. So again, the feeling of duality is really one thing. It's the oneness of your focus on yourself. Because when you try controlled breathing, you're doing it because you care about yourself. Okay, you're giving yourself self-care. You're taking your conscious awareness and focusing on yourself in a focused, not fractured way. So when you practice controlled breathing, that's the description of mindfulness, and you achieve coherence. So they all work together. So when you do controlled breathing, you don't have to understand why it works. You don't have to understand that you achieve coherence and you reach gamma, and you don't need to know any of the science.
And it's not any particular religion. Like, even though God has been mentioned today, it's not a Judeo-Christian God. This is beyond any sense of any type of organized religion as well, correct?
Right. It is. It's the commonality. And it's like I said, being at zero, there's a way to find the middle. So when you don't have a human objective to prove your point about your religion versus somebody else's religion, that's where everybody gets stuck. It's like I've always been just shocked that all religions believe 99% the same thing, but they're willing to kill each other over the 1% they disagree on, which is how to worship and who you're worshiping to. So the most important part is the 99%, but people focus and fight over the 1% that we have indifference. So finding that commonality is what gains power. So I can speak to somebody in their language, whether they want to say God or universe or, it doesn't matter. I want to speak your language. And that the most important part is your stance with God and your stance with spirit or whatever you call it. Because through crisis of any kind, that's what gets rocked. You wonder why, and that this isn't fair. And, you start going through that human suffering that we generate in our own mind. And the commonality crosses any denominational religion and culture.
What an incredible conversation.
Yeah? All right.
Thank you for laying it all out there today. We really have gotten a great sense of who you are, your incredible story with your son. It's amazing how much you can blend the spirituality with, that's been rooted in your son's experience of cancer, that you did not sugarcoat, you didn't say like it happened for a reason as a way to justify his pain and suffering. I think that those elements are really important, but you're also not shying away from the reality of the devastation of what it meant for you and your family and your heartache and the rocking of your foundation that happened with that diagnosis. And then thank you for sharing your story with us about how that really ended up driving you deeper into mindfulness, into coherence, into controlled breathing, and into a mission to share that with the world, really targeting families and pediatric patients, but now everybody who could use mindfulness, which is really everybody, which is kind of what the theme of our podcast is.
That's perfect, Jillian. I just love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for listening today with Jeff Granville. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also get more information from and about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com, and about Jeff's organization, his nonprofit, Mindful Presence, PRESENTS.org. Or even better, come see us in person at our Seattle-based clinic or via video. Please be sure to share this show with your friends. We welcome your rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. And feel free to send your topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together, and we are committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.